Hello and welcome. Our topic for this lecture is risk management. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of projects and programs you're likely to find in information organizations. Much as we've found with other topics we've looked at, such as needs analysis, risk management writ large can encompass a lot of territory, and we could spend a lot of time on it. And perhaps more than needs analysis, risk management has the potential for getting a bit on the mathy side when you look at its quantitative aspects and think about underwriting and actuarials, cost-benefit analysis, and other details of that sort. But we won't take that deep a dive. I'm sure you've all read the news and have heard about things like ransomware, phishing, things of that sort. So enterprise risk management is a huge deal, and I've included a recent article on it in the supplemental readings if you're curious, but we're going to limit our discussion mostly to the project level. There are a few different standards and methods relating to risk and risk management. Information organizations such as libraries should, for example, have risk management plans in place for disaster avoidance and recovery for everything from hurricanes and floods to cyber attacks. But that's a completely different process and scope. The ones most applicable to our needs include a couple of ISO standards, which we won't cover because they're not generally available without paying for licensing, and the Project Management Body of Knowledge, or PMBOK. According to ISO, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and that's only, I think, partially helpful because risk deals with events that may or may not occur. Events that don't occur have no effect. The PMBOK is useful in a couple of ways. First, it recognizes events that may or may not occur. And second, it also reminds us that uncertain events may have positive as well as negative effects on project outcomes. So let's run through PMBOK's take on risk management in a little more detail. First, recall from our earlier studies that PMBOK recognizes 5 major processes and within those 10 knowledge areas. Risk management is one of the 10 knowledge areas, and if you were going to go for the project management certification, you'd be tested separately on it. So I've mentioned that events, if they occur, can have positive or negative effects. This is a little different than our everyday sense of risk, which generally only considers risk in terms of negative consequences. Good managers look for ways to reduce risks and enhance opportunities, and that's good risk management. Another important part of the definition is embodied in the phrase, if it occurs. If it occurs, it's no longer a risk, it's an issue. In designing digital preservation solutions, Baratiero et al. Have suggested a taxonomy of risk to digital preservation projects that could probably be extended to most projects in information organizations. Risk is divided into 2 major categories, vulnerabilities and threats. These are further subdivided as shown in the paper and on this slide. Examples are given for each. Now, what you need to do for any given project is to take these major categories and look carefully to determine whether there are any specifics you need to add or modify that are unique to your individual project. And are there any categories of risks that need to be added to those shown here? This taxonomy may be too narrow depending on the project, although there are a lot of things you could fit into these buckets. For example, where might you put new changing market conditions? Or would you need a new category? How about available number of personnel? Or organizational maturity to complete the project? But I think this is a useful place to start brainstorming. In general, what the chapter in PMBOK on risk management covers are the 5 steps in creating a risk management plan. The first step is to identify as many of the risks as possible. For digital projects, Baratiero covers these pretty well and fairly comprehensively. Then, each risk should be evaluated and given a probability and an impact score. These are used to determine for each a risk score and a risk response, and an overall determination of project risk. Finally, a management plan is completed that shows how the project will be monitored and reevaluated over time. Let's go into a little more detail. Suppose we're going to digitize some records for our project, and we've identified that failure of our network-attached storage, where we are hosting the digitized files, is a risk. We estimate that on a scale of 1 through 5, the probability is medium-low, or 2, and the impact to the project would be catastrophic, or 5. We would create a spreadsheet similar to this and begin entering our tasks, including estimating probabilities and impacts. Remember that these are basically guesses, but experienced project managers have experience, and so these are educated guesses based on experience. And when it comes to equipment failure, the manufacturers often have published specifications such as MTBF, or mean time between failure, that you can go on. So we see that there's a probability that some event may occur, and then there's the degree of impact. Some things might happen that are pretty trivial. Some things can happen that can kill the project. Next, multiply the probability by the impact to come up with a risk score. You can collect your risk scores in a color-coded risk chart like the one shown. This is a visual aid to see where you are with project risk. This chart shows we have one low impact risk, one medium risk, and one catastrophic impact event. There are some links that show you how to create different kinds of charts. The basic chart I want you to produce for the assignment is the symbol one shown in the top half of the slide. You'll need to determine your risk response for each item. There are 4 basic responses to a risk depending on the probability and financial impact. If at all possible, you need to avoid high probability, high impact risk by choosing some strategy that will assure that it never happens. In the case of your storage system failing, for example, keeping redundant copies of your data on multiple servers, or buying cloud storage means that even if your equipment does fail, you won't lose your data. On the other hand, you may not be able to do anything about short staff, but it won't kill the project in most cases. It will just take longer. You may use these for discussion. Once the risk response and plan is generally established, be sure to set some ongoing monitoring indicators that will track your risk factors to assure not only that harmful risk consequences are avoided, but that should events occur that will give your project an advantage, they're taken advantage of. The risk management plan is part of your overall project plan and in most cases accompanies it. In some circumstances, for example, some grant applications where space is limited and specific sections of narratives are required, it will need to be omitted. One man conform to requirements, but it may strengthen the application to mention that a risk assessment plan is in place. Okay, so a final word. Don't let the tail wag the dog. There are very few projects small enough that risk doesn't need to be considered. Even if it's a one-man project over a short period that's barely more than a few weeks, odds are that it will involve other people and resources. And if you could lose your job or a promotion over it, if it goes south, you'll probably want to ask yourself, what could go wrong? But on the other hand, small to medium-sized projects won't need a full-blown risk analysis with 100 risk factors and responses. You should also be sensible about risk. You should ignore risks that are truly remote and largely irrelevant, such as errant asteroids, and check to see if your institution already has a disaster risk management plan for fire and floods in place. Next, you don't need to consider things you already are planning to take care of in your project plan. For example, if your project plan has LOCKS, short for lots of copies, keep stuff safe, already factored in, don't waste time on the NAS, Network Attached Storage Failure case, just for the exercise. For your projects, don't overthink this. You should convince me you've thought about it and understand the concepts and how risk management integrates with project planning. But don't overdo it either. So, thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to see what you come up with.